also we like a bit of passion. You know?
Absolutely. Well, this is, you know.
Nothing wrong
Oh,
with passion.
hey, thank you. We're live. Thanks very much. I'm Steve Pleich, and I'll be your host for this edition of Voices from the Village. After a short hiatus, first of the year, we're back and doing some programming, and we're really delighted to start tonight to talk about the project that proposes to build a combination downtown library and parking garage, although, as my guest will point out, you can't really conflate the two. There's a parking garage and there's a renovation of the library, and we will talk much more about that. And we're delighted to have people here who are not only knowledgeable about it, but passionate about this issue as well. My good friend, restaurateur and chef extraordinaire, Joseph Schultz, welcome.
Thank you.
Gene Brocklebank and Michael Lewis, founders of the Don't Bury the Library group, which has really done so much great work in really educating people about this particular project that has really gotten so much attention and so much interest in town, and yet has been really so much misinformation about the project itself. Let me start by reading something that I got a nice email from Michael and Jean and talking about this particular issue. And they said they are fond of quoting Mayor David Terrazas from the Sentinel. Said, "We should show respect for the past by doing a better job of taking care of what we have. We don't just start over from scratch, throwing away everything from our past. Instead, we renew, we revitalize, and we transform." I think that's a very apt description of kind of what we're talking about here. So let's start with a brief history, really, and let people know why Measure S was on the ballot, and then what happened between June 16th when the measure was passed and December 6th when the public first saw the proposal for a library in a parking garage. So Gene and Michael, you want to start that discussion?
Well, the process actually started quite a bit before the Measure S.
Mm-hmm.
In 2013, there was a facilities master plan done by the library that took a look at all of the library facilities, all of the branches that we have throughout the county,
Mm-hmm.
and looked at what their needs were, what needs to be done. They recognized that there had been quite a bit of deferred maintenance that hadn't gone on, and so some of the libraries were getting in pretty bad shape,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the downtown branch,
Right.
which has a lot of problems of it. And that then led to the proposal for Measure S,
Mm-hmm.
and Measure S was passed to give money to refurbish, to repair take care of the deferred maintenance,
Mm-hmm.
and do what needed to be done to bring all of the library branches up to a 21st century library.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it didn't say anything in Measure S at all about building a new downtown branch library.
Ah.
Now there were two, the
Mm-hmm.
Felton and the Capitola libraries, that had already been planned, and those were included in Measure S, but there was nothing in Measure S about building a new downtown branch. So suddenly, in 2016, here came the proposal to the City Council to build a library in a parking garage.
Let's
Yeah.
is it okay
Please.
if we back up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, of course.
That measure was on the ballot in June of 2016,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time, it was a property tax measure
Right.
to tax each resident $39 a year for 30 years to pay for it. Apparently, we found out later, Steve, that the library people,
Mm-hmm.
knew that $67 million bond issue was not going to be enough to do everything that had to be done in terms of building 2 new libraries.
Capitola and Scotts
Yeah,
Valley. Yeah.
Those were included. But
Or
they
Felton, I'm
knew-
sorry. Yeah.
Felton.
Uh-huh.
But they knew that it wasn't going to be enough money to do everything that had to be done to take care of decades of deferred maintenance
Mm-hmm.
and the needs of the libraries. But they still, and they did a poll, and $39, that was it. They didn't say $40, they said $39.
Yeah, $39, there you go.
$9.99.
Uh-huh.
So that was on the ballot. At that time, the county system-wide library system had hired a new library director who was coming from Minnesota.
Susan Nemmers.
Yes.
Yeah, we've had Susan on the show here.
Oh, very good.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good.
And Janet O'Driscoll, so we've had
Good,
folks
yeah.
over. Absolutely, yeah.
Good. Well, she came just after Measure S was passed. And apparently, between the time Susan got here and the December 6th meeting, city council meeting, there was a meeting, I'm going to call it behind closed doors, because it really was behind closed doors, between the city manager, the library director, public works, city staff. The public wasn't involved in this, the city council wasn't involved in this. They sat around a desk somewhere and said, I know, let's build our 5 to 6 story parking lot, and we can put a brand new downtown library in as a tenant of that new parking lot. And so they hatched this idea of this combined project, and it was then formally presented to the city council on December 6th of 2016. And the first we saw of it was in the agenda packet. You know, the public has to look at those agenda packets. And so we couldn't make the meeting, but we sent in comments and we said, whoa. So that is what happened up to that meeting, that December.
And I do think it's really endemic. You mentioned that staff was really generating policy. I think what's happened in Santa Cruz, and the times that I've run for city councilor recently, that I've tried to bring to people's attention, that the city councils have abdicated the responsibility to actually develop policy. They said, well, staff, you do this for us and bring us a program we can rubber stamp. And it sounds to me like they, in this situation, is actually the staff that has done that so much over the last few years. We're hoping now that a new, more progressive city council will actually take back that policy-making, power and be able to make, I think, more knowledgeable decisions about things that impact the public. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, at that meeting, a motion was passed unanimously by that city council. And can you remember the things that the motion included?
There were 5 things that they were going to tell the city manager, Martine Burnell, to do. And one was to establish the Downtown Library Advisory Committee, to look at what it would take to build a new library. The other was to work with the farmers market to find a new place for the farmers market to relocate. The third was to work with the Downtown Commission on parking fee restructure to pay for the parking garage, because the parking garage couldn't use Measure S money. So they had to find another source of money for the $37 million at that time that it would take to build the parking garage itself. Also, they called for a work plan, for an outreach plan, and a funding plan from the city. And then finally, they called for an independent study to verify the savings of renovation versus a new build. And so that's very important.
They tagged. The staff report had the first 4 things. Someone, and we have no record in the meeting minutes. Somebody said, well, how about looking at restoration? So they tacked on that 5th. The staff had recommended a resolution that had just a motion that had just those 4, and they added that 5th one. And the city manager was to provide for an independent study of the cost savings of renovation of the existing library versus building a brand new one in this parking garage. Never happened.
Yeah. It sounds to me, and we were talking about it briefly, that there's 10 or so well-meaning people that really weren't advising on anything that was going to happen. They were just commenting on a plan that had already been developed by staff that all of a sudden is now public knowledge through a council vote. And that's at the point where I think people, some of our viewers, I'm sure, had the same reaction. We're just shocked by, this is what's happening to downtown Santa Cruz. This is what's happening to our library. This is going to be this huge garage and library combination that's going to now displace our farmers market. I want to stop here just for a second and get Joseph involved. Joseph, you and I are both downtown guys.
Oh yeah, and I voted for Measure S, and I was enthusiastic supporter of the library and continue to be such. And I was shocked to hear that suddenly we had a parking garage folded into it, although I'm an enthusiastic supporter of transportation as well.
Sure.
And it sort of seemed to me that this was a runaway train driven by forces that we weren't up to speed with. And so I, tried to get as much information as I could to find out what was behind this. And I was sort of shocked that so many assumptions were made about our community direction that hadn't actually consulted the community.
Well, that's what you're saying, that you've been in Santa Cruz as a restaurateur and as a resident for a long, long period of time.
Yeah, I've been here
and
for 50 years.
You've seen Santa Cruz transform into what it was before the '89 earthquake, and then how it transformed again after the '89 earthquake. And now I think we're in another 21st century transformation. And I've seen the architectural renderings for the new farmers market. It's going to be behind Chianti's on Front Street. They're supposed to be displaced by the garage and library, although we don't want to conflate the two, because I do think it's important people understand that we can have, if you want more parking downtown, which is another conversation, but you can't have parking in a parking structure without having it be, have to be part of a library transformation. And we can use the structure we have, and I think that's some of what, as I understand it, the Don't Bury the Library folks are talking about.
And in fact, I'll just interject that in public at one of those Library Advisory Committee meetings, that Martine Bernal, the city manager, actually stated clearly that the parking structure wasn't dependent on having the library as a tenant. And so, yeah, we want to separate them, especially now that we have a new city council that's willing to look at the idea that we can, if we have $28 million, think about that, $28 million, which you could do to upgrade, revitalize, and modernize, if you will, if they want to use the word modern. This whole 21st century, it's got to be vibrant. How many times do they use that word? A vibrant economy, a vibrant library, a vibrant restaurant. It's like.
Well, one of the things that's really interesting to me about Santa Cruz is so many of the key landmarks that people used to drive around are ones that don't exist anymore. We talk about the McHugh Bianchi building. That was a landmark for years. India Joe's. I mean, people still talk about, go to India Joe's. No, not the new one, the old one. We talk about, the Cooper House, of course, another tragic, vibrant change, I guess we might say. And I just think it's so strange that we're defined by these things that are no longer there. And that's why we're having this conversation, I hope, is to decide, well, what do we really want to be defined by?
Hence, the title of this show is kind of the future of downtown Santa Cruz, because from what I've been able to gather, and I am a downtown guy, I spend almost all my time downtown doing the various projects that I have, so I'm there 7 days a week, morning, noon, and night, and talking to people about, what their vision for Santa Cruz is. Do we want to have, monolithic, portable housing by somebody's standards built? And, the last open space was the Compass Rose spot where Bookshop used to be, and now it's a large development. They're thinking about, carrying you down and community printer, university printers, and all that to put, housing in there. And I know that we really need housing, and we need to be, I think, modern and forward-looking in how we develop it. But is this the Santa Cruz that we want to see? Is this the vision? Is just your vision of Santa Cruz?
I think it's really important that we don't, as we talk here about renovation of the existing library and not building a new one, to not disenfranchise those people, because there are many of your viewers out there, I'm sure, who really would like to have a shiny new library building. And so I don't want to say, so we can't talk about a collective what we want or what we... Our Don't Bury the Library campaign is based mostly, this is going to sound very old-fashioned.
Yeah, well, there's room for
the
that
law
here.
And on the rules and on the regulations. In other words, we have Measure S. It was passed by the voters. It did not say anything about abandoning the existing library and taking money and building a brand new one. And the public was never engaged, and we feel very strongly about that. The other thing that we base it on is that, yes, this library is 50 years old. Now, people who don't like the library and want a brand new one say, it's 50 years old, as though it's got a foot in the ground. You've been here for, Yes, it's 50 years old, and there have been architects who have said it was built to last and it can last another 50 years.
Right.
You just have to maintain it and take care of it, or as former Mayor David Terrazas said, you don't just abandon these things. So we're also fiscally conservative. In other words, it costs a lot of money to abandon and demolish a building and build something brand new on there and haul it to the dump. We've just been talking about, does that make sense environmentally? Are we an environmental community or aren't we? We don't just trash these buildings, we fix them up. And if you've got $28 million, you can do a heck of a lot of fixing up, including preparing the roof of that library for solar rooftop.
Wonderful.
solar
I think we
panels.
need to look at the quality of life issues here. Part of what I look at when we look at the library is this is classic, 50s, 60s architecture. Now, that's not the be-all and end-all of architecture by any means, but it's so much a product of its time. Yes, times have moved on, but this is a time that we all have our feet, built in. And it's tragic to say, oh, we'll build a new building that'll be new. I think Patrice Boyle was the one that pointed out that the design of the new building basically is of a fortress, of a defensible space, not a welcoming space. And I think we want to think about the possibility of maintaining what little welcoming space we have. When we look at this parking lot now at Cathcart, we see a farmer's market, we see an antiques fair, we see all sorts of parades starting there. We see the community using it in many
We have our
different
Festival
ways.
del Nopal there every year. It's huge and very popular.
Are
And
you
that-
talking about the Lot 4?
the Lot 4.
It's a beautiful.
That kind of flexibility is on one level not as profitable as sort of maximum use. But at the same time, when you go for maximum use, you cut out the flexibility. One of the things that's interesting about the parking structures in Santa Cruz is it's actually illegal to linger in them. There's laws on the books. You are not allowed to be in that structure for more than 15 minutes. And what does that say about our quality of life that we're telling our citizens that they can't hang out in public spaces? The public space we have where people do hang out is widely appreciated. And I think we need to look at that.
One of the reasons why the library and the garage project has come off the rails is because of these kind of considerations, the vision of what we think Santa Cruz should be like and what downtown Santa Cruz should be, our common spaces, and all of the things that we think about Santa Cruz never had a chance to be in the process of the planning of this thing. The library in a garage concept came from behind closed doors. It was presented as a done deal to the city council. The DLAC, the Downtown Library Advisory Committee process, didn't have public meetings. Nolan Tam, the architect, was supposed to have 3 public meetings. It was in their contract.
Community meetings.
And those were never held. There was one public meeting that was held toward the end of the DLAC process, just before they made their decision. It was the only open public meeting that was done. There was public commentary in the meetings, but that was after all of the activity had gone on in the meeting at the end of the meeting. And there was no good outreach to let people know that was happening. So this vision of Santa Cruz, whatever it is, whether it's on one side of the extreme or the other or in the middle or a combination of everything, was never part of that process. And now it's come off the rails now because now we have new people in the city council that have a different vision than the old people.
And they are saying that they want to revisit this process. They want to be able to talk more about that, to have more public input, as we were mentioning earlier. The new progressive component of the council seems very interested in talking to people before they make decisions that affect people. And that's very different than I think councils that we've had in the past.
Promising.
So it's a ray of light.
And city staff is pretty much in this loop now. In fact, last September 11th was the city council vote to go ahead and proceed with the parking garage library. And then we had an election in November. Between September 11th in the middle of October, I emailed the city to ask them where are we in the they were supposed to prepare a request for proposals
Right.
to design build. And they said, well, we're trying to get it out. We wanted to get it out. This was going forward with this project.
course, yeah.
We want to get it out. We were hoping for Thanksgiving week, but we don't think we're going to make that. So probably the first week in December. Well, lo and behold, we had an election, and they put the whole thing, it's a stale, they put it on hold. They are not working on that right now because they are aware of the fact that we have a new majority on the council who are very interested in a renovation, saving that library, upgrading it, and giving it the proper revitalization that it needs without destroying the existing architecture, Joseph, too. So,
Is it your hope that the new council now, there's a present composition of the council, I should say, will begin scheduling some public meetings, some hearings, some process to, as I say, revisit this, since we're not yet at the RFP, the request for proposal stage, thankfully, but there is an architectural plan, I'm assuming, that's been developed.
no.
It is
There's
not?
no art. That's the funny thing about that whole
Okay,
process.
now you can
2
disabuse me of that note.
Two-year process, and the architects didn't even come up with the floor plan. Nobody, and that design that you saw came from Group 4, the city's consultant, Group 4,
I saw that
said,
architecture, yeah.
you know, people, because we called it "Don't Bury the Library." Oops, I touched the microphone. Sorry. Because people were thinking, "Don't bury the library," so we have to come up with something that doesn't look like the library is buried. So they had the Group 4 come up with that crazy, beautiful picture of a library. I mean, that's not
awful
real.
sad.
We actually have
Potemkin Village.
one
is what
moment.
they
We
call
actually
it.
have a call.
Oh, good.
Caller, you have a question for our panel?
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
And I'm wondering whatever happened to the Metro project. I thought they were going to build a parking garage there and put a park there in the Discovery Museum, and I thought that would have been a great place for a parking lot. Start with what's already a Metro Center and put a parking lot there.
Okay, thank you for that question.
I don't do parking. I do library. We'll give it to Joseph.
Joseph? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I heard the ideas floated that they're
Yeah.
talking about, dozens of millions of dollars
Yeah.
for something, but it's
Yeah.
unclear what it is.
Yeah.
I think
Well-
it was not embraced very well by anyone.
Yeah,
that,
well, there you go.
parking
No,
lot.
in
Is that
their,
kind
in
of
their
thing?
wisdom, the citizens
Yeah.
of Santa Cruz decided
We
to
don't
say,
like
well,
that.
we don't want that.
Yeah.
Let me remind you that I'm remiss in not mentioning this earlier. This is a call-in show. We're live. You can reach us at 425-8848, extension 630. That's 425-8848, extension 630. And these panelists with a wealth of knowledge about this will be able to answer your question, I'm sure. So now let's get back to kind of, we've heard some of the history. We've kind of seen where we have arrived to, and now where do we go forward? What's going to happen with the Don't Bury the Library folks working with City Council, citizens becoming involved, being more knowledgeable about this, and actually having some impact about where and when and how we revitalize our library?
Well, our group, our campaign, and I should mention that Michael and I are just two people. We co-founded it basically on December 5th, 2016, the day before the City Council voted on burying the library and a parking garage. But we were joined within a month by a librarian. And within 6 months, we had our newsletters were going out to almost 70 people.
Which I have seen many of.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
And then 6 months later, there's more than 100 getting them. So it's not just us. So the public that's learned about this and found our website, which I guess
let us know which website.
Don't Bury the Library, and the easiest way to get to it, just Google for it.
Okay.
It comes
up right on top.
right
Really
on top.
beautiful. Okay, Don't Bury the Library. Google that. You can find out much more than we have an hour's worth of time to do, but we get a lot of information tonight.
Well, the neat thing about our website too, I'll just say this: Michael's a webmaster, and I will brag on him because he probably won't brag on himself, or you could, but it basically is a library of information.
Is that right? Well, that's
Every
a wonderful way to put it, huh?
It is. Every document you could possibly want to understand what happened for 2 years before and since is available. It's very user-friendly.
That's the thing. When we went through the decel process, we had a wealth of information, but some of it was so technical and so arcane that it was just difficult for people to absorb it all.
Yes.
And yet they had a very visceral decision to make. I don't want decel, and that's kind of what it came down to until we began to educate people. But hopefully, the information you have on there is something that people can, read, can understand, can digest, and then make a knowledgeable, as I say, an informed decision, and then carry that to City Council and tell them what they think.
And in the meantime, now this is not up. We're going to be putting this next thing. We'll announce it on your show. Goes up on the website tomorrow morning. So if anybody goes and looks for it tonight, they're not going to find it. But tomorrow morning, we have recently submitted. Michael and Judy and I signing the letter to the City Council on behalf of 122 people, what we call a blueprint. So how we know where we are now, we know it didn't work, and that stopped. So how do we go forward? And we thought maybe we should just have a recipe or a blueprint for how to restore and revitalize the downtown library for the 21st century and beyond.
And I see that right here in the information that you were so kind to send me, and it's wonderful that you would send to council members.
Basically what we did is we wrote to City Council and we said we'd like for you to consider our blueprint, and we'd like to give you some ideas on how to move forward. So it's very crisp and clear. Step 1, step 2, what can be done, and anybody will be able to see this tomorrow. They'll be able to see it at the next City Council meeting, maybe, because if it's in an agenda packet. But that's what we've decided to do, is try to offer an alternative. Where do we go from here? And these are the steps, and this is what you do. And when people see that, if they feel that makes sense to them, not just the City Council members, but if people do, then they can get behind that. We're not staff. We don't write requests for proposals, but we have good ideas on how to start that process. So my guess is that the new council has been incredibly busy just for look what they've done in the first month.
They have a lot on their plate, and to their credit, they had 3 meetings in January, so they're hitting the ground running. So I applaud them for that they have so many issues that they really have to deal with. They're important, but this is a very important issue because not only does it impact our beloved library system and library, but as Joseph said, it really is the vision of downtown. It really is, our welcoming spaces. And I don't think that we really have enough of them. One of the visions for Santa Cruz way back was to have a town square out by where now it's a Starbucks. So we're not going to have a town square out there, but where are our welcoming spaces, and shouldn't they be, perhaps, in existing
I think it's important to
places?
see that we have many different issues that are being conflated to the people are trying to sell this library by talking about the parking. They're talking about the parking to sell the library. And my position, I got dragged into this discussion because as a longtime business owner, I'm always being told that you have to have parking.
No one drags you into discussion, Joseph. They can't keep you out of them.
I'm glad to be here, and I owe it to Rick Longinati for coordinating so much of this. And but this issue of business owners, fronting for the city workers deciding we need more parking is sort of a red herring, because I'm one of many business owners that think that parking is not the real problem that the Santa Cruz business climate has, that there are other problems. And when we talk about town commons and we talk about a vision for the future, it's important to not think that the business community is the idea of a very expensive project. It's interesting to see a progressive city council that might actually be fiscally conservative.
Well, they have good
They're not
reason. They have-
mutually
well,
exclusive.
yes,
they
You
are
can be
mutually
well,
exclusive.
they have good reason to be. I tell
Yeah.
people that the city council, the progressive composition of it, has many wonderful ideas and programs they like to do, but they're dealing with budget deficits, so they just don't have money to do a lot of things. But that's not the case of the library. We have $28 million. And I wanted to ask you, is this a time-sensitive thing, and we need to rush to judgment on this? Can we take our time and move with all deliberate speed and go back and really get a full and fair and robust process so everybody kind of understands where we get to eventually?
Good question. There is a time constraint.
Okay.
We had 8 years.
Okay.
We've blown
right.
2 of them by spending 2 years talking about sticking a new library in the parking garage. But we still have 6 years, and actually it may be more than that, because didn't you see another slide that said till 2025?
2025 is the,
Okay.
and there is also a chance, if things are really rolling well, the project is well started, underway, there could be an extension on that.
Right.
If they can apply for an extension, then it would probably be granted.
And it has nothing to do with the $67 million, of which some is being used for the nice Capitola Library, the Felton Library. So those funds are already being
The funds are
appropriated.
all allocated.
Yeah.
And so the downtown library basically has $28 million. And
Because this is not money that's being generated as the money comes in. They're selling bonds on this,
Right.
so they'll have all the money right up front to do
Yeah.
these big projects,
Yeah.
and then will be the whole county will
Right.
be paying for them for the next
Yeah.
30 years.
30 years.
Yeah, that whole assessment and bond process
Yeah.
is very arcane, as I mentioned. People just generally just don't understand it. It's enough to know that we get the money and we have it, and we do.
It's very
and we can use it.
complicated, and I
Yeah.
think it is the bond
Yeah.
sellers or buyers
Yeah.
who set the deadline
Yes.
of 8 years. And we asked the library director if it was possible to extend that, and she said she thought that it might be possible. So might be possible.
Right.
So, but still, 6 years. If we spend most of this year having the kind of discussion that should be had, and coming up with a recommended request for proposal for design, build, for restoration, then send that out to, I think it should be a statewide and even a nationwide search. Come to Santa Cruz and restore our 1950s
Yeah, there you go. Wonderful
library.
idea. Wonderful idea.
And why not? Everybody wants to come to Santa Cruz, especially if it's wintertime and you're in Minnesota. Let's go to Santa Cruz and restore a library. So plenty of time to have that out for 3 or 4 months, to make sure that it's seen all across the state and all across the county, not just throw it out for a month and come up with nothing and say, well, nobody submitted anything to restore, so we can't restore the library. And then start getting serious about next year's 2020. So we
Yeah.
still have 5 years to get it built. I don't have any concerns that we have enough time to do that and do it right.
Yeah, and I noticed, and thank you again for setting this wonderful outline. It really kind of guides and informs our discussion. That we were talking about directives were given by City Council, unanimously passed, and then did we talk about how those directives were implemented or not? Where are we in that process?
The directives.
He's referring to the
Oh, okay.
5.
Well, the DLAC was formed. We
Right.
went through the process,
Okay. That
so
one.
that one's taken care of.
Right.
The farmers market has been talking about this, and the
Much to everybody's chagrin, I think.
well, the farmers market, their main concern, and I can't speak for them, but
Yeah.
since they're not here, from what I hear from them, is their main concern is they want a permanent place for the farmers market.
Yeah.
They deserve
and,
it.
And if they had a permanent place on Lot 4, that would be cool.
Right.
Because that's where they're having now, and everybody knows to go there. So the farmers market is working out. The parking rate structure is still being worked on and has not been completed yet. And there never has been an independent study verifying the savings of renovation versus a new build. That was not part of the DLAC process. It never happened. And in fact, the whole idea of a renovation of the existing library really got short shrift in that process. And was never, what they did was they took one of the original alternatives, which was to gut that building entirely down to bare walls and floors and then build something new inside it.
Huh.
And of course, that was $28 million, I think
No,
it was.
it was $37
$37 million to do that. So when we pressured them to come up with a reasonable alternative that could be done within the existing budget, which at that time was only $23 million,
Right.
what they did was they took that big pie in the sky renovation and they just took things out of it. They said, okay, well, we won't do this, we won't do this, we won't do this, we won't do this, until they got it down under $23 million. We have a call?
No, doesn't
Okay.
look like it.
So
But they wanted me to mention it again. Okay, and I will. Remember, Michael, just briefly.
Sure.
425-8848, extension 630, call, and we will be happy to answer any questions you have. Michael, please continue.
So there never has been a real detailed study of the renovation that we're proposing now. And so part of the blueprint is that study be done.
Well, actually, to be fair, the directive was to provide an independent study of the cost savings of renovation versus a new library. It's the same thing.
Right.
But the problem is that stood on its own. That was number 5. The committee was number 1. The committee was never supposed to look at a restoration alternative. That wasn't their job. The city manager was at the very first meeting of the Downtown Library Advisory Committee.
Right.
And he explained the charge for the committee. And the charge for the committee was one thing and one thing only, and that was to help design this new library that's going to go into the parking garage. So what happened is a few of us said, wait a minute, what are you talking about, a new library? I thought we were supposed to fix up the old library. And so they raced around real fast and they decided, well, okay, we'll talk about restoration in the committee, which was outside of the committee's charge.
Right.
Unfortunately, it gets worse. Their first, as Michael explained, their first restoration alternative was to gut the existing, take everything, leave its bones, leave the bones of that building, and build a brand new library, which was $10 to $12 million over budget. So that was a joke. And they finally came around with what they called the partial restoration. 2 weeks before this committee that had met for a year and a half, 2 weeks before they issued their final report, that's what this thing is. And they came up with this lame restoration alternative. They never even discussed it at the committee meeting.
And you were saying that none of these committee meetings were public at all? Was there,
Here's what they were. They were
Yeah.
held, if the public wanted to go upstairs at the downtown library and watch the committee meet, the public could do that. But they were not the community meetings for the community to be engaged to say what the community wanted. It was, you get to watch them have, and some of them were 2 and 3 hour meetings. And then at the very end, there was public comment time. First of all, it's a done deal, it's all over. And if I'd been sitting there for 2 or 3 hours, I would have halfway listened and I would have left. They didn't record what the public said. And in fact, none of the comments, am I correct on this?
That's correct.
That were taken at the public, any of these meetings, including the only one community meeting they had, which was December 3rd, wasn't it?
I think
Just
so.
before the report came out.
Yes,
They're not even published
in the report.
in the final report that was submitted to the City Council. City Council never got to see that 90% of the people who showed up at that December 3rd meeting said, we want the library restored. We want it revitalized, we want it rejuvenated, we want it rehabilitated, all those little RE words.
I was at that meeting. I remember that was the one that was at the library and they had
Yes.
all the different kiosks.
Yes.
And it was.
Oh, no, that was the open house.
Oh, okay.
That came
was
after.
very demoralizing, shall we say. It really felt like a railroad job where they weren't really interested in hearing from the public at all. They'd already made up their minds very clearly, and they were going to explain to you what your best interest was.
You got it.
Yep, that was it.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
It was a dog and pony show, and you got it. I mean, it was real obvious to us and obviously obvious to you and obvious to everybody except those who are trying to push the project.
Right. Now, to people, when they're talking about this kind of monolithic combination structure, and I will deconflate this back to a library and a parking garage, do they ever compare it to the structure they have in Watsonville, which is a combination library, parking garage, city council chambers, courtroom, and all that business that they put in one huge location, which for Watsonville works wonderfly? It's a terrific, if you've been down there, their library is really very spacious and roomy and modern, if that's what you want. They have that. But I hear people from time to time saying, well, how about, look at this thing in Watsonville they have that works for them. Why can't we have something like that?
Well, different is not the same. What
Of
was
course
proposed
not. Yeah.
for here is not Watsonville. And now is when I wish that Judy was here, because she is a librarian at the Watsonville Library.
Yeah.
And she takes exception to that, them comparing the plans for the downtown library to the Watsonville Library. I've never been to the Watsonville Library. I do know that at the meeting that you went to upstairs, that you said that it looked like they were just pushing this thing, they had pictures on a screen that would flash of these new modern libraries in Calgary and Boston, and, you know, and they all have 18-foot ceilings. You know, you're in a library, you're either sitting, or even if you're standing, you're no taller than 6 feet. And so why build a building that, and you have to heat or cool that air 18 or 20 feet above you? It's all about the building. It has nothing to do.
And that's exactly the case with the Watsonville Library. And again, in their wisdom, they decided that was best for their community, but not necessarily. I would, I would call it a functional space, but maybe not a welcoming space, as you were talking about.
I just want to point out, Watsonville has a center gathering square.
It has a beautiful town square, practically right across the street.
Good
exactly.
It's a different thing.
And the other thing is too, how much did that cost? We don't know how much that was. We know that we have a limited budget here, and we want to make the best use of our money.
Of course.
So.
And we do know that a brand new library, not as a tenant in a parking garage, would cost $50 million. That's everybody knows that that it would take $50 million, and we don't have $50 million of Measure S money.
So I mean, some of the nuts and bolts things, the people who developed this proposal, when they're looking at the old building, there was some suggestion there was seismic problems, or there was this, there was that. It's too expensive for us to go through and be able to do the kind of renovation that you're suggesting. True or false?
Let me tell you, in my previous incarnation, I was an archaeology curator at museums. And I designed 2 major research facilities. I designed the technical storage and research areas for 2 big museums. And the first thing we did was to go through and figure out, okay, what do we need? Do we need this and this and this and this and this and this? And we prioritized that list of what was most important down to what was least important. And we put a dollar figure out on the side there. And then we went down and added up those dollar figures. And when we got to the budget, we drew a red line. Here's what we can do with the money that we have. Prioritized by the things that are most important. That never happened in this process. No one ever did that. No one made a list of things that needed to be done to the existing library to deal with the deferred maintenance. The HVAC system, the elevators, plumbing, electrical, that sort of thing. The bathrooms all need to be replaced. And no one figured out, we asked them one time, what would it take to fix the HVAC system? Well, I don't know. I think he knows. And we'd go over and we'd ask somebody over there. And well, I don't know. That we've never talked about that. So there was no way. There was no way to figure out what can be done with the money that we have. And now we have $5 million more than we had at that time. So now that process needs to start. Now they need to figure out what should be done.
One thing we don't have to worry about is the seismic integrity of the current downtown library.
Good, we can dispel that notion.
Absolutely.
The city paid money to a structural engineering firm, Fratessa, Forbes and Wong, and their October 31st, 2014 report to the city is what the city's Nolan Tam architectural consultants referred to in one of the committee meetings, in which they said they were surprised at how seismically sound the downtown library is. So the city in 2014, before it hatched the parking garage library and started talking about, well, the seismic, you know, and we're worried about seismicity, they had a 2014 structural engineering report saying that that downtown library is structurally sound. I think there are two, and that's on our Don't Bury the Library website.
Absolutely.
You
Check
can
that
go
out.
there and you can find, we've got the document, because I wrote the city and asked them if we could have a copy of that. And so we don't have to worry about that.
So yes, the roof it's time to fix the roof. You have to do that with any building all the time. And so as long as you're going to fix the roof, make it ready for solar. Put solar panels up there. Yes, the plumbing needs to be redone. Yes, they need new bathrooms. How much does that cost? Nobody knows. Yes, the HVAC system has to be upgraded or replaced. Nobody knows how much that costs. There are 2 elevators that need to be replaced with new elevators. They do know how much that costs. So all it is, you just add those things up. Which is more important? Get the things done that you need to do.
It seems like a very common sense approach to me. You know, if you're going to,
wouldn't we do that in our own homes? If
certainly.
you have a home or an apartment, whatever it is, you figure out what your budget is and what you can do, and then you do it and stay within the budget.
And those things that you can't do with the budget you have, then those are projects you can have fundraising programs for afterwards to get those things done.
Yes.
And the library system, certainly to their credit, is well able to raise funds in the community. I know the Friends of the Library System, we had them on, wonderful people. As I say, we've had Susan Nemmers on, Janet O'Driscoll, great people. But there still seems to be in the community, I think, a division, and I think it's, as I mentioned earlier, a division on an emotional level and not necessarily an analytical or informed level. And that's the importance of having a discussion like this, to be able to really explain to people and have them go to your website and say, well, okay, now I understand a bit more about the process, or how I can be engaged in the process, or what really I want to see for my public library.
And I want you, Steve, and Joseph, anybody who is watching your program today, to know that our trouble is not with the library director. Susan Nemitz is a wonder woman. Janice O'Driscoll, all of them. In fact, we've had 3 private meetings with Susan in her office, had really good conversations with her, and we have a lot of respect for her. So this isn't us versus them, they're doing terrible things. All of the members of the Downtown Library Advisory Committee were well-intentioned, well-meaning. They brought their passion, they brought their ideas. Everybody engaged. The problem was that the project, they were all handed a project after the fact, after somebody else hatched it, and they were stuck with that. And the public was confused because where did this come from? We didn't come up with this idea. So it was just an unfortunate set of circumstances that they started off on the wrong foot, like you said, a runaway train.
Joseph, absolutely.
And so that's why we're suggesting with our blueprint, let's start again and let's do it the right way this time. And I like what you're saying, Joseph, too, about the whole, in fact, your whole program tonight is not just about the future of the downtown Santa Cruz Library. It's titled The Future of Downtown Santa Cruz.
Absolutely,
and there ought to be room in a future for downtown Santa Cruz that includes the elders. I sometimes get the feeling that we're being asked to, you've had yours, now step aside and let the new generations come in and have theirs, wherein most other communities respect their elders because the elders bring the history and they have that wisdom that comes with being an elder. And so elders, it's not like here's community and there's the elders stuck over there. We are part of the fabric of this community. And I don't know about anybody else at this table, but I plan to be around for another 20 years.
Amen.
And, and I would like to think that my views and my ideas about what's valuable in terms of that existing library at its civic center
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
I would like to think that that counts and that we're not just being selfish.
Well, I think that's true as well. That's a really signature location in downtown Santa Cruz, certainly for the Civic Auditorium, which they're not thinking about tearing down and moving somewhere.
Right.
They're thinking about renovating it on various levels. Again, Michael, they're looking at several different plans, say, well, we can afford to do this, or we can afford to do this, or we can afford to do this. It's somewhere along the line they came to the wisdom that you're, explaining to us now, that, see what you want, see what you can pay for, and then maybe at some other point we can raise some money to do something else. But that's the way they've kind of approached that, and of course they haven't really done anything with it yet, but still,
By the way, in terms of renovation, we're also suggesting that they look at phasing the renovation. When the city of Santa Cruz remodeled and upgraded their two-story building there on the other side of the fountain, they were very proud. They phased that. They had to replace the whole HVAC system. They phased that. They kept working, and they phased that. With the library, it might be able to be done in phases. There are two stories. It might take more than that. But the budget for doing that includes over $700,000 for relocation expenses for a period of time. So that's already been incorporated in
Now,
that
can the
first
information
budget.
you have here, that'll also be available to people at some place?
It's all on our website.
Okay, it's all on our website.
Our little library.
Because the more that we begin to talk about this, and the more people want to be informed about, knowledge is a wonderful thing. It's exponential. The more you have, the more you want.
Yeah.
And so, it's terrific to have a place for them to go and take a look at this.
Well, we have a contact us
Yes.
on our website too, and they can contact us and get on the update newsletter.
Which I get regularly.
Yes,
and
and you
enjoy
know
very
how
much.
helpful those are. So if,
Yeah,
if
very.
anybody wants to
Yeah.
get that, they can contact us and they can be added.
So it's kind of what's happening day to day, what has happened, what's going to happen, where the boots on the ground need to be, and that kind of thing. Because it's all, this is another opportunity for really grassroots politics in Santa Cruz.
Right.
Really taking control of your community. Joseph's been around a long time, and nobody's more grassroots than Joseph.
And as the time comes when this is going to come back to the City Council, we'll be putting out the newsletter and calls for people to pay attention, look at the agenda for the meeting coming up, show up at the meeting and speak.
No, it's very
for the
important
library.
because although for Brown Act regulations they do have to publish the agenda 72 hours ahead of time, a lot of people don't go over there to the City Council chambers and look at it, or go online and look at it. They say, somebody mentions word of mouth. Oh, by the way, there's they're going to raise your taxes. You might want to go and talk about it. Or by the way, something's happening with affordable housing or the homeless. So it's very important, I think, for people who are concerned. And I think it's important to say that everybody really loves our library system. It's a wonderful system. It is, Joseph's talking about a welcoming space, and there are precious few of them in Santa Cruz. The library is that space for elders, for youth, for the homeless, for everyone. And because of the work of Susan Nemers and Janet O'Driscoll, it's also worth mentioning, they make it a welcoming space. So why don't we try to preserve that welcoming space whilst we are doing some things that we know are going to take us into the 21st century.
When you first walk into the downtown library and you look around, you think, wow, this looks old. And they've taken up carpet because there were spills. And the way it looks now, just imagine spending $1 million on the entrance to the library. $1 million to put in new carpet, new tiling, paint, public art.
Graphics.
That's $1 million. We have $28 million. This is why I don't understand how people can say it's not enough. You can't fix this library. That's ridiculous.
We have a couple of minutes left. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure that our viewers have appreciated this opportunity to learn more about this very important and interesting issue in our community. Another minute and a half. What would you like to tell people about where we're going forward from this?
Just keep track of the City Council. It'll be coming back there again. There'll be lots of discussions on various parts of this as it comes up. So it's going to be an ongoing process. It's going to take a while. And sign up for the newsletter so we'll let you know when and where and what's going on. and even have a link to the agenda when it comes out, so
Terrific.
that you
Yeah,
can
that's
go right to
that's
the agenda.
important.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping that they will be informed by folks like yourself when they go through this process. I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, we're going to go revisit the process, but let's not repeat the same mistakes we made before. You know, let's have public process, let's have community meetings, let's have some input, let's figure out what we can and can't do in the $28 million that we have, and then let's go forward and do it.
It may have been a learning process for,
Yeah.
we hope, for city staff
Yeah.
also, one can
Yeah.
hope. I don't see it before the council much before end of March. They've just got their hands full.
Yeah.
and
No, you're
I
right.
could be surprised they could spring it on us next
Yeah.
week, but I just don't. I think there's too many other urgent things going on. So
That
Well-
need attention too.
they need it.
By the thought leader.
They need
Yeah.
attention too.
Yeah.
But you know, again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I really do commend our new composition city council for really hitting the ground running. We had
Absolutely.
3 council sessions in January, and they are really concerned about having as many public comment sessions as they possibly can. So there is some light in terms of the vision of Santa Cruz. And I think you all here are some of the architects of it. You know, and I think it's important for people to know who you are and what you stand for and what kind of information you can give people and how important their views are and how important you consider their views to be. And that really what makes public dialogue important and what makes public dialogue really form and determine the kind of community that we're going to be living in. So thank you for all this great work that you're doing. Thanks for
Thanks
the
for
you know
having us.
Don't Bury the Library folks. Thank you, Joseph Schultz. May all be fed.
May all be
My
fed.
running buddy. Appreciate you all being here and really being concerned about community issues. I've been Steve Pleich, and I'll be that for a while longer, I'm hoping. Join us again in a couple of weeks when we'll have another show discussing another challenging issues that are facing our community, and hopefully we'll have guests that are just as interesting and just as informed as the ones you've been subject with it tonight. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time on Voices from the Village. Good night.